Good morning. Welcome to newcomers. I'm Nancy Hershatter, a member of Sunday Services Committee and a sometime provider of music on Sunday mornings. I signed the membership book back in 2010. Since then, UUCD has been a source of spiritual nourishment, intellectual exploration, a broadening of horizons on so many fronts, as well as a cherished feeling of community. During the pandemic, these sources of nourishment have become even more vitally important. I am grateful. So welcome to the online service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. We are so glad that each of you are able to join us this morning. Together in community, we can ensure that social distancing does not mean social disengagement. Our weekly services are more than just a gathering of our physical bodies. It's the forming of a sacred time that we've been making together for 199 years now, as we work to build a more just world. And in that sense of sacredness, along with deep respect, we acknowledge that our physical building is on the traditional land of the Paugussett people. Whether you are well-versed in the technology of teleconferencing or not, we welcome you. For those of you who are new among us or reconnecting with fonder hearts, we invite you to introduce yourselves and where you're connecting from in the chat box as you're comfortable. After our service, we invite you to stay and participate in a breakout group for individual connections and deeper check-ins. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, whatever your theological stance, whatever your heritage, whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. You can learn more about us on our website and our Facebook page. We encourage you to share our Facebook page and reach out to others who may feel isolated and might benefit from the spiritual connection with our loving community. And now for a couple of announcements. Young adults of UUCD will meet today at noon, and you can contact Sequoia Low for more information. Reverend Kathleen has been providing a couple of opportunities for us to get to know her better face-to-face, calling this the Meet and Eat Gathering. And the next one will be on Saturday, October the 9th at 5:30 at the Ridge for any folks who are unable to make it in September. Outdoors, unless it's raining. If indoors, of course, masks will be required. It's BYOF&D, bring your own food and drink, lawn chairs, and sense of humor. A time for conviviality with the minister. RSVP to Rev Kathleen, address on your screen. Oh, screen rhymes with Kathleen, I like that. Today we are welcoming Tom Krottenmaker as our service presenter. Tom is a writer specializing in religion and values in public life. A longtime contributing columnist for USA Today, Krottenmaker is the author of 3 books, including Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower, which was honored by the Religion News Association as one of the top 2 religion books of 2016. Welcome, Tom. And welcome all to the UU Congregation of Danbury, where we welcome all in a spirit of compassion, inquiry, and service. And now please join us in our morning hymn of Welcome, Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Today's opening words are from Matthew 25. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Please join us now for the chalice lighting.
Good morning, everyone. Gather your chalice and something to light it. Give you a moment to do that, and then we will say our affirmation together. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another and celebrate life.
Good morning. It is good to be together. If there are children and youth who are in the room but not near the screen, I want to invite you to come on over. We're about to say our children's affirmation, and I'll share a story. And while you're on your way over, let me remind families that we meet for religious education at 11:30, and anybody in kindergarten through 8th grade today, please bring blankets for blanket fort making. Get in touch with me if you have any questions. Let's say together the children's affirmation. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. And now our story. This story is a parable. It's a story within a story. It looks old here because the story came to us from long ago. Sometimes parables are hard to get inside, but keepers of these kinds of parables, people who are Christian, believe that parables are like gifts. We don't have to earn them or buy them. They've already been given to us. So here's a little gift to represent the story within the story. Let's listen now and find the story within the story. There was a man who did such amazing things, said such wonderful things, that great crowds of people followed him everywhere. Sometimes the people asked him questions. One day, a person asked him what the most important thing in life is. And Jesus said, "You already know." Then the person said, "It's true, I do know, but we love God, that we love God and our neighbor just as we love ourselves." "Good answer," Jesus said. "Go and do it." But the man replied, "Who is my neighbor?" So Jesus told this story. A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. So if you'd like, hold up your hands like I am and imagine them as two places, Jerusalem and Jericho, with a road stretching between them. And there's a man on this road. While the man was on the road, something terrible happened. He was attacked by people who wanted to rob him. They hit him and hurt him really badly and took everything that he had. He was so badly hurt, he could not move. The sun was hot. He was in a lot of pain. Now we need to imagine someone else on this road, a priest who was also traveling between these two places. Jesus said, there was a priest who also happened to be traveling this road. I bet we can imagine how startled this priest might have been to come upon a man who was so badly hurt he could not move. The hurt man looked half dead, but the priest crossed to the other side of the road and kept on going. Now let's imagine that the priest was not the only other person on the road. Let's imagine another person here. This person traveling this road was called a Levite. He might have been working in the temple. He might have been taking care of the temple. He might have been helping the priests. And when the Levite saw the man who was hurt, lying in pain in the hot sun, looking half dead, he also went to the other side of the road and continued on his way. But let's not lose hope. Let's imagine another traveler was on this road. Jesus said that this third traveler was from a place called Samaria, a traveler from another place entirely with a different religion. In fact, people from Jerusalem, where the man who had been hurt was traveling from, people from Jerusalem thought of people from Samaria as kind of an enemy, certainly not as someone they would like. But when this Samaritan, this traveler from Samaria, saw the man who looked half dead, lying in the hot sun, so badly hurt he could not move, the Samaritan stopped. He put bandages on the man's wounds. He put the man on his donkey and brought him to an inn, a place to stay while he got better. The Samaritan gave the innkeeper money to take care of the man, and he promised to come back and pay any extra money needed for the man's care when he returned. Only then, when this stranger from Samaria had made sure that the man who was so badly hurt would be taken care of, only then did he continue on his way. When Jesus finished telling the story about the injured man and the three people who came upon him on the road, he said to the man who had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers and was hurt?" The man answered, "The Samaritan," that third person. "Good," said Jesus, "be like him." That's the end of this parable, the story within a story. And it's an invitation into our own wondering about it. I wonder, who is the neighbor for the Samaritan? I wonder if Jesus were telling the story today, who the Samaritan might be. I wonder if this story would be different if instead of all men, all the people in the story were women or non-binary people. I wonder if this story would be different if some of the people who came upon the injured person on the road were children. And I also wonder how I can make space for this parable in my own life. That's part of the beauty of a gift like this. It opens doors to answers and more questions. Our lives too have stories within them with their own answers and questions. Here we choose to bring some of those stories into community, to share those joys and that are so wonderful that they must be shared, and to share our sorrows that are too much to carry alone. And we make ourselves neighbors for one another, reaching out with care and love. During the music in the moments to come, you're invited to share in the chat the joys and sorrows of your life this week, and to receive the joys and sorrows that others share. If you'd like, light a candle or drop a stone in a bowl of water as a ritual act to mark the milestones of this community. Let's prepare our hearts for sharing. And please let us share now.
Let us take a moment to hold the milestones that have been shared and those that we're holding in our hearts before Jerry leads us in Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
A reading from Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower. Does Jesus have a claim on us? Maybe so. Not because he's the cosmologically anointed savior, but because he's right about the world in really important ways. And it's of great benefit to us and our world to heed his teachings. And even though seculars and non-theists will never be caught dead talking about things like the body and blood of Christ and partaking of them, I hope you can see that it's not a bad idea at all, to think about how we might, in some sense, internalize what he stood for. In a similar way, there's a robust way we can find elevation in the story of the resurrection. In the words of my religion writing co-conspirator Brandon, quote, "What's radical is not that a man rose from the dead. What's radical is what that means, specifically what it meant for Rome, and by implication, what it means for all kingdoms everywhere, including the ones we live in," end quote. A resurrection conversation is well worth having, not like the argument that's been carried on since time immemorial about whether Jesus literally rose from the dead and what kind of form he assumed post-resurrection, but a conversation about the symbolic and ethical meaning of that resurrection, of that transformation, and what it might mean to us today, what it might offer to us today, individually and collectively. How are we going to live our lives? To what ultimate ends are we devoting ourselves? What bottom line ethic is going to inform the countless decisions we make and the actions we take as individuals and together? These are the kinds of questions worth asking if our lives are going to be fully lived. And while the Jesus story is far from the only place where we can find insight and inspiration, it is an extraordinarily good place to go looking.
It is now time for our congregational offering. If you are new with us, we welcome you. Please pass the virtual plate. We hope that you will join us again. Members and friends, you can express your generosity by clicking the link that will be posted in the chat. And you can also send a check to 24 Clapboard Ridge Road in Danbury. We thank you so much for doing your part to sustain this community that we all love. Now, please join me in our congregational response. In the spirit of compassion and service, we dedicate these, our offerings.
Good morning. I send my warmest thanks for the invitation to be with you today and to all who organized this service. You all do a great job. And thanks to the congregation and visitors for listening to and considering my message. I come to you from New Haven, but that is mere geography. In a more important sense, I come to you from a growing space in the secular world where non-religiosity is only a starting point. Instead of spending all our time pointing out what's wrong with religion, my fellow travelers and I are exploring things like, okay, so we're not religious, now what? How are we going to live our lives? How are we going to find meaning and inspiration? How are we going to create and experience community? How are we going to be good and do good? And that actually is the backdrop for what I'm talking about this morning. How secular and non-theistic people, you used to, of course, in the quest for ethical input and inspiration in pursuit of meaning, can engage productively with the figure of Jesus. That's right, Jesus. I contend that in the pantheon of philosophers and prophets and teachers and artists and moral exemplars and sages from the ages, Jesus stands out as a particularly compelling figure. He's a figure of unusual wisdom who calls us to reconceive the orientation of our lives and the way we engage our fellow humans. His story compels us to access our reluctant generosity and pull ourselves out of our self-centered worries and obsessions. This figure's inspiration can change the way we treat the supposed nobodies and so-called enemies whom the culture teaches us to dehumanize and despise. Admiration is one thing, but can someone really follow Jesus as a secular person? How and why would they? Well, let me start with why. I find the ethics and example of Jesus to be extraordinarily instructive, transformative, and applicable to so much of what ails us today, individually and as a society. It's amazing to me how relevant his teachings and example remain 2 millennia after his public ministry. It's remarkable how the example that he sets addresses and transforms things about life that are broken and painful. Well, here are a few examples to show you how following Jesus reshapes my orientation to life, both my personal life and my engagement with public issues. Jesus hung out with the supposedly wrong people, people who were not part of his group. And he's compelled me to do the same. He ate meals with, he engaged in intimate community with those who were anathema to the pious and respectable people of his place and time. Connecting with the outcast other, whether by handshake or conversation, whether by extending friendship or learning what it's like to walk in that person's shoes, can have a profoundly positive effect on that person and the wider world and on you. As I've striven to make the Jesus way my way, my life has been enriched by my warm interactions with people who are not my tribe, not my group. Something that's been fortunate for me and something I never would have expected is the friendship and the partnership I had with the Muslim community back in my former home of Portland, Oregon, as well as the relationships I've had with numerous evangelical Christians. Probably my most flagrant transgression in this regard is my engaging seriously with the figure of Jesus, who would seem to be off limits to a non-believer like me, who is deeply bound up in a Christendom that is not my world. But I contend that his wisdom and way offer far too much to remain confined behind a culturally imposed boundary. Jesus reveals the futility of violence as a sustainable long-term solution to conflict and everything else. Following Jesus, I'm continually committing to a philosophy that regards violence as an absolute last resort, maybe someday a never resort. Understanding that violence inevitably perpetuates more violence. Through a Jesus lens, I see that violence alone does not yield sustaining solutions. Jesus shared great wisdom on this score. You know the story. When the soldiers came to arrest him and his disciples unsheathed his sword, Jesus told him to put it away, uttering those famous words, "Live by the sword, die by the sword." Before we dismiss nonviolence as futile or quixotic, let's remember the impact that nonviolent Jesus has had on history. Let's recall how nonviolence has moved mountains, figuratively speaking, when deployed by people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and others. Here's another one. The teachings and example of Jesus have compelled me to live a less anxious life, to worry less, and to trust more. Ours is an anxious age. There is so much to worry about, both personal and global. Many of us do feel anxious, do worry. So do I, although thankfully less than before. Jesus taught that we should take a breath and be calm. The Jesus teachings about the lilies of the field, the birds of the air, also the parable of the loaves and fishes, these yank us out of the mindset of contrived scarcity, which so often brings out the worst in us. In one memorable Bible story, Jesus and the disciples are traveling by boat when they're hit by a fierce storm. The boat is tossed violently, yet Jesus, as if to practice what he preaches, sleeps. Yeah, he sleeps. When he finally wakes up, he calms the storm that's been blowing on the sea and in his followers' hearts. What a metaphor for what can happen when we trust the Jesus way in our struggles with fears and worry. Not that we shouldn't think through our problems and plan ahead, not that we should shirk responsibility for things that are in our control, but the Jesus teaching helps us see that at a certain point we have done all we can, and that pointless worrying will add not a single cubit, to use one of those old Bible words, not a single cubit to the length or quality of our lives. And here's the last example. I contend that Jesus is a savior, that Jesus saves. Yeah, that probably sounds crazy coming from me, but let me explain. In the more conservative precincts of Christianity, the question is posed. Are you saved? There's a proposition and a threat. Accept Jesus as Lord and Savior and be saved, or don't accept that and face eternal torment and punishment. I think it's a shame that Jesus is set up this way. It has the unfortunate effect of making him irrelevant to the many of us who will not or cannot buy into a literal heaven and hell. And it obscures the enormously rich set of teachings and insights that apply to this world and this life. I've come to see that the Jesus way indeed can save us, depending on what you mean by that word save, even if we are non-theists and find no motivation in the promises and threats of a wondrous or hellish afterlife. Jesus can save us from a life of trivial self-seeking, of consumerism, the never satiated need for more, from a life that misses the point. Jesus can save us from the hell of a life that is lived only for ourselves. Why follow Jesus? Because following Jesus, however we do it, changes us and thereby begins to change the world for the better. I hope you agree. But how does a non-religious person follow Jesus? And is that even legal? In the years since my Secular Jesus Follower book came out, I've heard every conceivable reaction. Some readers thank me for putting words to and empowering what they have long sensed and what they have long been doing. To some, it's deeply inappropriate. To some, it's puzzling or off-putting. To some, the whole point about Jesus is that he's the divine Son of God, and to accept that proposition or not determines everything. From this vantage point, to follow Jesus as a secular person is sort of like ordering a cheeseburger and then telling the server to hold the cheese and the meat. But a secular Jesus follower I am. And if you want to know how that works, focus on the word secular. I relate to Jesus in a secular way, a non-theistic way. Because a secular person, by definition, is not part of organized Christianity, not seeking church acceptance, I am free to pursue Jesus in accordance with my own conscience. I can skip past the parts of the Jesus story that focus on doctrine or the supernatural, the miracles, resurrection, salvation, teachings about God. Or as I prefer to do, I can translate them into words and concepts that make sense to a secular mind. Okay, I don't believe there was a literal resurrection, but the story is rich in metaphorical and moral truth and meaning. Of course, this is dubious from a traditional Christian perspective, but this pursuit I am talking about is outside of that sphere. It's a secular pursuit, a non-theistic pursuit. To those who charge that I'm fabricating Jesus in my own image, I point out that it's not a made-up Jesus either, not by any means. The aspects of Jesus I engage are sourced from the New Testament. About the most disapproving person could say is that it's an incomplete Jesus who I'm trying to follow. So be it. Even if the secular Jesus is an incomplete Jesus, I contend there is still a lot there. Even if this pursuit is unsatisfactory from a traditional religious standpoint, there's something very valuable about the secular Jesus following that I'm talking about. When the proposition is framed in a non-theistic way, Jesus becomes available to many who could benefit from engaging with this figure, but who lack the particular forms of God belief that are usually required for such a pursuit. The problem with my claim and quest is not the one that some traditionalists describe. It's not that non-religious people or non-theists are barred from following Jesus. Such disapprovals are toothless. I'm inspired and guided by Jesus, whether authorities approve or not. The problem is that my secular Jesus following could be lame. It could be distorted. It could be self-serving, so half-hearted and unreinforced that it becomes as thin and light as a piece of paper. So what's the solution to that? Pretty simple to describe, although it does require effort. It requires the cultivation and reinforcement of practices and habits, the company of fellow travelers who are also working on their ethical lives and spiritual lives. It involves continued reading, study, and conversation. So I make a big claim in my book, a claim that you can be a secular Jesus follower, and I stand by it. I stand above all for the ethics and values of Jesus. I contend that if our world were closer to the world conjured by Jesus, it would be a more peaceful world, a fairer world, a more compassionate world, a more humane world, a world animated by philanthropic love for people on the margins and those we are tempted to turn into enemies. A world where so much that is cynical and disillusioning is transformed, is turned inside out and upside down in the best ways. To the extent that I orient my life this way, that I channel my work and time and energies in this direction, my own brief time on this earth becomes richer and more meaningful. And I think this applies to all of us. So that's a glimpse of what it looks like to be a secular Jesus follower. The quest is as real, as valid, as meaningful as I, with a little help from my friends, am able and willing to make it.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's now time for us to extinguish our chalices. If you could join me in our shared affirmation. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again. Join us now for our closing hymn, There Is More Love Somewhere.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
These closing words are from Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower. What of hell? I find its presence all too real in our lives and societies. In the hellish experiences everyone bears, some, alas, much more than others. But that's as far as my credulity will stretch. As for heaven, that too is a bridge too far for me. I do believe, however, that glimpses and whiffs of something finer, something bigger than ourselves, can occasionally be ours, and our lives are finer for them. I am not talking about eternal life or other supernatural phenomena. I'm talking about experiences of inspiration, of getting outside ourselves and our narrow self-interest. Experiences that usually have something to do with beauty and compassion, with selflessness and love.